presentation this morning. So our latest research project is entitled Keeping the Faith, a study of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion in ASEAN. And I will give you briefly the main findings of the report. So the reason why the HRRC embarked on this study is because in 2012, the heads of state of the ASEAN member states signed the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. And among the many provisions there, they said that every person has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. All forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred based on religion and beliefs shall be eliminated. And so we thought at the HRRC that this is a very good political statement, that this is a laudable commitment, and we wanted to see how the ASEAN countries are actually implementing this aspiration to eliminate all forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred. So the study is comprised of 10 country reports. So for every country report in ASEAN, we hired one country rapporteur to report on the state of freedom of religion in that country. And so each country report describes the legislative and policy framework, the trends in freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and the contributing factors and surrounding circumstances. And after all the country rapporteurs submitted this information, the head of research, Dr. Jacqueline, she put together a synthesis report which provides a descriptive outline of significant events. It gives the key observations of the factors motivating and underlying these conflicts and acts of persecution, and it highlights some trends across ASEAN. And so for the overview of the findings, the basic instrument, the basic international instrument that provides for the norms with regard to international, for the respect of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is found in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in Article 18, which states that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and that this right shall include freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice, and freedom either individually or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. So you also have other provisions that support this freedom to practice or believe. Now, among the 10 ASEAN countries, only 6 have signed the ICCPR, and these include Cambodia, Indonesia, Lao PDR, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. So 4 countries did not sign the ICCPR, which makes the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration very important for us in our view. And the 4 countries that did not sign are Brunei, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Singapore. On the screen, you can see the constitutional provisions on the protection of freedom of religion in ASEAN. So religious freedom is an important commitment for ASEAN member states. It is legally guaranteed in all constitutions except for that found in Brunei. So if you compare the provisions pertaining to protection, all of the countries except Brunei put it very strongly as a right, or they guarantee it, or they use a strong language and say that freedom of religion shall be respected. They use mandatory terms, shall and should. Except for Brunei, which simply states that the official religion of Brunei Darussalam shall be the Islamic religion, and all other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony. So it has to be practiced in peace and harmony with that of the Islamic religion by the persons professing them. But if you look at the other provisions, they are very strong, and they say, for instance, in Cambodia, Khmer citizens of either sex shall have the right to freedom of religion or belief. Or in Indonesia, the state guarantees all persons to freedom of worship, each according to his or her own belief. So we are in ASEAN, we feel strongly about our religion. It's something that we understand and respect. And we also look, in the report, we also look at the declared state-religion relationship. So in 5 states, in the box that I have highlighted in red, in five states, they have constitutions that expressly or implicitly privilege the majority religion or that privilege one religion as the religion of the majority. So these are Malaysia, Brunei, Cambodia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand. The constitutions of Malaysia, Brunei, and Cambodia contain clauses that outrightly declare a state religion. For instance, for Brunei, it says explicitly, the official religion of Brunei Darussalam shall be the Islamic religion. For Cambodia, it says Buddhism shall be the state religion. For Malaysia, it says that Islam is the religion of the Federation. Thailand and Myanmar privilege religion, in both cases Buddhism, in their constitutions, but stop short of declaring it as a state religion. So they do not call Buddhism as a state religion, but they say that the union recognizes the special position of Buddhism, or for Thailand, it says that the state shall patronize and protect religions as the religion, Buddhism as the religion observed by most Thais for a long period of time. With Indonesia, although the constitution does not privilege any specific religion, it does say nonetheless that it privileges monotheistic belief. The constitutions of Lao PDR, Vietnam, and Singapore do not openly address state-religion relations, leaving open the possibility that the state may control and or privilege one or other religion. So if you look at the boxes highlighted in blue, those are Lao PDR, Singapore, and Vietnam. They do not declare a state religion. They do not declare a particular religion in their constitution. So they leave it silent. The Philippines is unique in that it is the only ASEAN country that expressly separates religion from the state. So it says that the separation of church and state shall be inviolable. And so the study found that there are some significant trends in communal conflict based on religion or religious prosecution across ASEAN. The most notable found are in Malaysia, Myanmar, Brunei, and unfortunately also in Indonesia. So with regard to Malaysia, there has been a notable increase in violent persecution of dissenters and minorities within Islam. So in Malaysia, what we notice is that discrimination can occur not only against those who profess religion outside of Islam, but it can also occur even within Islam itself. This is most prominent in the fact that Muslims who wish to convert out of Islam face prosecution and detention. Apostasy is even a crime punishable by death in one of the states, in Terengganu. The law has not yet come into force because its constitutionality is in doubt. In the majority of other states in Malaysia, persons wanting to renounce Islam can be legally detained for religious rehabilitation. There has also been an increase in interreligious persecution targeted at Islamic communities that are not aligned with Sunni Islam, which is the religion embraced by the majority of Muslims in Malaysia. Groups that adhere to teachings generally perceived to deviate from Sunni are persecuted as being heretics. So members of the Al-Arqam group as well as members of the Sky Kingdom have been detained and prosecuted. In addition, Shia Muslims have also faced religious persecution in the form of harassment and detention. Religious minorities in Malaysia have also reported increasing instances of violent religious persecution. This takes the form of demolitions of places of worship. According to reports, between 2005 and 2014, there were 6 cases where local authorities demolished churches or chapels built by indigenous communities. In addition, about a dozen Hindu temples have been completely or partially demolished since 2006. Also, if you were watching the news, as I'm sure you have heard, conflicts were also triggered by a High Court ruling saying that the Catholic Church can use the term Allah in the Malay language version of its newsletter. During this period, there were reports of attacks on places of worship belonging to Christians, Sikhs, and Muslims, with Christian churches being the primary target of the attacks. The perpetrators burned out churches, threw firebombs and Molotov cocktails, splashed churches with paint, and hurled bricks and stones at glass windows of some churches. There were also reports of pig heads being thrown into the compounds of 2 mosques in Malaysia. With regard to Myanmar, the country report notes a significant increase in reported instances of violent religious persecution of Muslim minorities since 2012. This is after the political reforms announced in 2011. The most extensively documented instances pertaining to the treatment of Muslim Rohingyas, who are the majority in northern Rakhine State. So although they are a majority in number, they are politically and socially marginalized due to their highly contentious citizenship status. The country report notes that the Rohingyas have suffered serious human rights violations, including lack of citizenship, restriction on the freedom of movement, obstacles to family development, confiscation of land, forced labor, arbitrary taxation, and exclusion from the local economy. Also, the country report notes that although what has been reported in the media centers mostly on the Rohingyas, during the outbreak of social disturbances, even Muslims outside of the Rakhine State were being persecuted also. There is disagreement as to whether the situation in the northern Rakhine State constitutes religious persecution or sectarian conflict, where violence is perpetrated by both sides. So there are some violences that are perpetrated by the Buddhist followers and some are perpetrated by the Muslims. The country report concedes that it is indeed difficult, if not impossible, to identify perpetrators of violent acts because at one point the social disturbances became so convoluted that you cannot anymore say who is at fault. Nonetheless, there is a state responsibility because the government has failed or neglected to protect the Muslim minority from widespread violence, therefore making the state complicit to these acts of violence for failure to protect the Muslim minorities. In Indonesia, as Pak Said will describe to you later when he gives his presentation, the significant trends that we highlighted pertains to the Ahmadiyya Muslims. The situation of the Ahmadiyya Muslims is most prominent, and it is tied to an increasing assertive demand for the group to be declared outside of Islam and therefore banned. There have been reports of attacks on mosques and other properties belonging to the Ahmadiyya community. These attacks, however, it should be emphasized, were committed by what can be characterized as hardline Muslim group instead of it being a policy of the state. So it's not the policy of the state, but some Muslim groups that are attacking them. Besides the Ahmadis, the Shia communities have also faced violent attacks. The country report notes a 2011 incident where a small Shia community was attacked twice. In the second attack, a Shia follower was killed and more than 30 other houses were burnt down. So other groups that are also identified in the Indonesia report pertain to other Muslim groups, the Aliran, Kepar, Chayaan, and the Christians. So they also face occasional, depending on their locality, they also face persecution. We also note the situation in Brunei. For Brunei, while the new Sharia Penal Code Order 2013 places serious restrictions on the freedom of religion, there is notably an absence of reported cases of religious persecution thus far. So we don't hear of communities in Brunei being persecuted, like Christian communities or Muslim communities persecuting each other. But this could be attributed to the state's strong monopoly of power, resulting in a general lack of political and civic space for dissent. So maybe the synthesis report thinks that this lack of civic space is what is giving rise to this lack of political religious persecution. The state is able to maintain a highly effective system of surveillance and control without any democratic checks or balances. So there is not a civic space or political space for dissent or for opportunity to provide check and balances. It should be noted that there are reports of systematic state surveillance of non-Muslim religious institutions and communities. There are serious concerns that there would be an increase in religious persecution when the Sharia Penal Code Order is fully implemented, particularly in light of its harsh laws on blasphemy, apostasy, deviance, and sexual conduct. So some worrying provisions in the Penal Code include the prescription of death by stoning as the maximum penalty for blasphemy, apostasy, and sexual conduct. So what did we find are factors influencing persecution and or discrimination? So the first one that the report highlights is the politicization of religion. Many of the country reports note a worrying trend of politicization of religion in the ASEAN region and highlight that this has led to the increase in religious persecution and conflict. In particular, this is extensively discussed in the context of Malaysia, Myanmar, and to some degree in Indonesia. Religion is politicized when it is invoked in political discourse for political aims. Religion is an important identity marker for the people of ASEAN, and this has allowed politicians to exploit religion for their political goals. Politicians have found it convenient to invoke religion to either boost their own legitimacy, to gain votes or approval, or to undermine their political opponents. Another side effect of politicization is that politicians have found it politically expedient or simply politically unviable to not criticize religious extremists. The next factor is ethno-religious nationalism. Religious nationalism has been defined as a social movement that claims to speak in the name of religion, of the nation, and defines the nation in terms of religion. So for instance, in Malaysia, they would say that to be Malay, to be a Malay Malaysian is to be a Muslim, yes. And for also in Myanmar, they would say that there's a right of Buddhist nationalism. So religious nationalists invoke religious identity to mobilize followers to gain political support and oppose other religious groups. They seek to align and sharpen boundaries of the religious political community and tends to spread a high level of political animosity to those perceived to be outside the nation. So if you are a religious dissenter, you're not only going against Muslims, against Islam, you're simply going against religion. They think of you as a national traitor. The country reports note a significant rise in religious nationalism, especially in Malaysia and in Myanmar. In Myanmar, the country report notes that the Mabata organization has been asserting an aggressive form of Buddhist nationalism, which includes this demanding for stricter laws against conversion from Buddhism, interfaith marriages, and in some extreme circumstances, even inciting violence against religious minorities. The last factor that we wanted to highlight is the rule of law. The strength or weakness of the rule of law in a country can also contribute to religious persecution and conflict. For instance, a state with a breakdown of rule of law could open up space for religious extremism. This has generally arisen in the wake of democratization following a sustained period of authoritarianism. A temporary weakening of the state has allowed extremists to exploit the emerging democratic space and incite religious hatred. So we thought that this was found in the Indonesian report, where after the reformacy there was a weakening of the state power, and this can also be seen in what is happening now in Myanmar, where after the authoritarian government gave way to democratization, religious extremists exploited that space to go against religious minorities. Another issue with regard to rule of law is decentralization. Decentralization generally limits the state power because local communities are given greater scope to exercise political power and to govern themselves. So generally, decentralization is a good thing because you are giving the local communities, the local government, an opportunity to respond, and maybe they can respond more effectively because they understand the issues better than the national government. But we think that decentralization can be a double-edged sword. Decentralization can be exploited by the local government to discriminate against the religious minority in that area. In Lao PDR, the constitutional protection of freedom of religion is implemented in the decree on the management and protection of religious activities. So generally, it's a good law because it aims to ensure the exercise of the right of Lao people to believe or not to believe. So it actually respects freedom of religion. But the problem is that it lacks guidance with regard to implementation at the local level. Since the issuance of the decree, the Religious Affairs Department, the national department, has adopted a policy of non-involvement and allowing the local government to deal with religious issues. This decentralization in the management has resulted in the practice of religious freedom in varying degrees from region to region in Lao PDR. While there has been a greater religious tolerance in larger urban areas like in the capital city, there has been an increase in religious intolerance and greater restrictions on religious freedom in rural areas. There are reports that local village or district officials, along with local police force, have coerced believers to renounce their Christian faith or to engage in animist worship, using threats or expulsion from their homes, arrest, denial of education for their children, or other harsh punishment. The other country where we found decentralization to be also an issue is in Indonesia, and I will leave that to Pak Seng to speak more about that when he presents his report. Okay, thank you very much. So I will end the presentation there.